Hey guys, welcome back. So I'm back with another session on Spring Security. So let's start with Spring Security. So what is Spring Security? So Spring Security is a customizable authentication access level framework provided by Spring for server-side Java-based enterprise application. So Spring Security has lots of features. So one of the cool feature that we can think cool and basic as well is authentication and authorization. So let's assume I have a web app where I need to implement my security implementation. So an authentication and authorization level of security implementation is common for each and every web application where security matters. So Spring has its own authentication and authorization framework. So and most importantly, it is customized. You can customize it as per your need. So Spring also provides auth authentication, where you can make an authenticated HTTP request using a token and an identifier to denote an access to grant access on specific resource. Tokens are issued to third-party clients by an authorization server. So that's a different discussion altogether. So we'll go in depth in the later series. So as you know, I talked about the two major things of a security, that is authentication and authorization. So authentication, we know, is just a process of stabilizing a principle which a user can perform, by which an user can perform some specific what do we say, action in your application. So this is called authentication. And authorization is a process where we decide whether this principle is allowed to perform an action inside in your application. So let's assume I have a 3 resource, 1 2 3. Maybe I'm not good at drawing, so let's assume this is my user. So I will write over here user. Sorry. Okay, so and these are my resources. Resources. Okay, so this is my application, small. So let's assume this is a user u1. So user wants to access these are the resources r1. Let's take it r2, or numbering, that's 3, and this is the second resource. So let's assume my application needs to access this. My user needs to access this 3 resources. So before accessing those 3 resources, I need that user to be authenticated to enter into my system. So that is what authentication means. So once the user is authenticated, I will authorize the user to only access 1 and 3. Let's assume in my case. So I am restricting my user to access some particular resource. So that is what authorization means actually. It is an assurance that the user is actually the user whom I want to give the access to that particular resource. Say in my case 1 and 3. Right? Correct? So sometimes the mere process of authentication is not enough. Sometimes you also need to add some granular level of security. So in that case we have the authorization. So authentication and authorization, you can use it as per your need. So there are 2 types of authentication: HTTP basic authentication, and another is form-based authentication that we will talk about it. So irrespective of how authentication was undertaken, Spring Security provides a deep set of authorization capabilities that we will have a look. There are 3 main areas of interest in terms of authorization. So being authorized web requests, being authorizing whether the methods can be invoked, and being authorizing access to individual domain object instances. So these are the 3 things that we will figure out in our later sessions. So following other major, actually I will I will write over here. So these are the three things where you need basically this Spring framework. Where we basically use it as a Spring as a security framework. So number one, when user needs authentication and authorization. Number two, whenever I want to figure out this is the user whom I want to give the authentication and authorization. So that is what role-based access in terms. If we say in layman terms, it's a role-based authentication or authorization. So you can configure your role-based authentication and authorization using a database connection, using an encrypted password. You can use form-based authentication. A hell lot of stuff in Spring Security which you can use and customize. So Spring Security is the implementation. There was another third party, or we say it was under some other project initially, and it was undertaken by Spring. That is what about the history of Spring Security. If I go to the details, I really don't have much idea. So the history is what I know. So Spring Security mainly uses the namespace configuration. You will find XML configurations over there, and that will help you doing the configuration. A namespace element can be used simply to allow more concise way of configuring an individual bean, or powerful to define an alternative configuration. So that's where namespace comes into the picture. If you want to start using security namespace in your application context, you first need to make sure that Spring jars are present. So I'll show you an application that is present. These are all the jars that you need for your setting up the Spring Security. So these are the things that you need: Spring Security jars, web jars, core jars, config, web MVC, a lot of other things, but you don't need all those things. Okay, so and you will find over here there is a Spring Security XML that is needed. So this is the namespace configuration for an XML, right? Org schema or security. This is the configuration that you need to give. This is called the namespace configuration. So we'll have a look how to configure this namespace and what to configure in web.xml. So let's so one more thing I want to highlight: Spring Security is nothing but a chain of filters. There are a hell lot of filters that comes into the picture and gets executed one by one, and that is what Spring Security is made up of. There are lots of filters which you can use and customize it. So the main filter is Spring Security filter chain. This provides a hook into the Spring Security web infrastructure. So delegating filter proxy is a Spring framework class which delegates to a filter implementation which is defined as a Spring bin in your application context. So this is the bean. So the whatever request comes in, it will first there will be one filter that will be getting executed, and that is the delegating filter proxy. So these are the filter. This needs you if you need this filter to start with Spring Security, which is an internal web structure created with the namespace to handle the security level filters. Once you have added this to a web.xml, you are ready to start editing your application context file. Web security services are configured. So if you go over there, there will be security services, that is the HTTP security service. This is a manual configuration which says that we want all URLs within our application to be secured, requiring the role _user. So in my case, whatever the URL pattern you give, this is the URL pattern that the Spring Security look for, and it will restrict the user. All the user who doesn't have a role of _user will not be able to use this URL, or is log into the application. So the intercept URL pattern element defines a pattern which is matched against the URLs of the incoming request using an syntax. This is the matches. This is the path matching. This is the if we say it as let's suppose it is a regular expression for as of now. You need to use a prefix role. This is a marker which indicates the simple comparison with the user's authorities. You can put it anything, but it should make sense to use something like a role risk user or something. You can use anything over here in terms of code, but it should make sense. So the attribute autoconfig equals to true defines three basic elements. So it defines, there are some default configuration that will be there. So it defines form based login, it defines HTTP basic and a logout. So the default configuration always chooses HTTP basic authentication. So this is one thing that we should keep in mind. There is one basic authentication model. There is some authentication model Spring follows, but it by default follows the basic authentication model. If the model needs to be changed, form login model, then the following configuration has to be made. So I will show you those configurations, but not here. So there is a configuration where we say form login. I will show it in the later, better so not to mess up things over here. You can have multiple intercept URL pattern. You can have multiple access access specifiers, that is role user, role admin, or whatever you want. Okay. So if a request matches this multiple patterns, the method specific match will take precedence regardless of the ordering. So if you order something, it will take it. The configuration there we made this configuration, right? A user has to access this pattern URL, then he has to be a role based he has to be a user with role underscore user. So we defined our own authentication providers over here. So this authentication provides for what do we say, means that this authentication provider tag basically means that the user information will be used by the authentication manager to process the authentication request. You can have multiple authentication provider, it doesn't matter, but this will be ultimately used by the authentication manager to manage this authentication. So and ultimately it will be set in the Spring security context. So this is what this application does as a whole term. So whenever any request comes in, by default URL pattern, this is a Spring security filter chain that gets invoked. It invokes the delegating filter chain proxy. And this is the initial starting point where all the the filters gets executed in the order that is defined in a Spring security XML or Spring security configurations or in the Spring security library. So let's see how it works. I have already ran the application. Sorry, things are present there. Yeah. So see, whenever I am trying to access an admin URL, the Spring security will intercept me. So now I already logged in, so let's log out and try to access the admin URL. So if I am trying to access, okay, there might be some issue with that. Let's try the different one. So this is the welcome page. So if I try using admin, oh. So if I try to access the admin page, it's ask me for a login because I'm not authenticated as of now. So I'm trying to get authenticated. If my username and password is valid, this authentication manager will return the role underscore user to the Spring security context. So I am now authenticated and now able to access the admin page. Okay. So thanks guys for initiating this. I will continue with the other things in Spring security, but this is for introduction and Spring security setup. So thanks.